I hope that you're well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts grade 6. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of reflexive and intensive pronouns. All right. So our chapter is reflexive and intensive pronouns. Our subject is English Language Arts, grade 6. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of reflexive and intensive pronouns is to choose between personal and reflexive pronouns and to use reflexive pronouns. So that is going to be our chapter as well as our lessons for today. All right. So there's different types of pronouns, right? Remember, a pronoun, it takes the place of a noun, right? And with the different pronouns that we have, right, you can either have reflexive pronouns or you can have intensive pronouns. So we're going to find out what is the difference between reflexive pronouns, intensive pronouns, as well as the difference between personal and reflexive pronouns. All right. So with reflexive pronouns, right? Reflexive pronouns are pronouns with it's pronouns with, for example, that ends in self or it ends in selves, right? So once again, reflexive pronouns, it is pronouns that end in the word self or it ends with the word selves. right? That is a reflexive pronoun. And with reflexive pronouns, we have singular subjects and we have plural subjects. And remember, a singular subject, it refers to one person or thing that is doing something. And with a plural subject, it is more than one thing that is doing the action or that is doing something. And when it comes to, and remember, we said that a pronoun, it takes the place of a noun, right? So when it comes to a singular subject, right? A singular reflexive subject or pronoun, reflexive pronoun, but the singular subject, then if we use the word I as a subject, right? So if I'm referring to myself that is doing something, if I am doing something, and then the reflexive pronoun would then refer to myself. So I, myself. If we are referring to you doing something, right? As a subject, as a singular subject, right? One person doing something, which is you, and then the reflexive pronoun would then refer to yourself. So it's like I, myself, you, yourself. If she did something, right, then it's herself. If he did something, then it's himself, referring to himself. And if it's it, right, if we're referring to it, then we're referring to itself. Then we also have a plural subject, right? And remember, plural refers to more than one, right? That is plural, more than one person or more than one thing doing something. And if we refer to we, it's more than one. And then we say ourselves because we are referring to ourselves. This is the reflexive pronoun. If we're referring to you, remember you get you referring to one person or you get you referring to more than one person. Then we refer to yourself, yourselves, sorry. And then we have they refer to themselves, right? So when it comes to a singular subject, right, that refers to a reflexive pronoun and then it ends in self, right? It ends in self because we're referring to one person or thing doing something. And then if we have a plural subject, more than one person or thing doing something, and then the reflexive pronoun will end in selves because we're referring to more than one person doing something. All right. Also, when it comes to a reflexive pronoun, right, then a reflexive pronoun is used to refer back to the subject of the sentence or clause in which it appears. It's like we said, if myself is the reflexive pronoun, right, then it needs to refer back to I. If the reflexive pronoun is yourself, then it needs to refer back to you. If the reflexive pronoun is herself, then it needs to reflect back to she. If the reflexive pronoun is himself, it needs to reflect back to ye. And if the reflexive pronoun is itself, it needs to it needs to refer back to it, right? So which means that a reflexive pronoun, right, which is these words over here, it needs to refer back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears, right? And it should agree with the subject. And that is why I said these reflexive pronouns, myself, yourself, herself, himself, itself, or ourselves, yourselves, themselves, it needs to refer back to these words, these ones, which is the singular subject or the plural subject, depending on who or what they are talking about. If they're talking about one person, and then of course our reflexive pronoun is going to end in self. And if it refers to more than one person, our reflexive pronoun is going to end in selves, right? If we look at an example, right? An example is we helped ourselves to some more soup. We helped ourselves to some more soup. So at if we look at that specific sentence, right? Remember we said that our reflexive pronoun, this is our reflexive pronoun, it needs to refer to our subject. So if we go to the word ourselves, here we have ourselves. So which means that it needs to refer back to we, the subject we, and usually the subject is the at the beginning of a sentence, right? So which means that we is our subject and it refers to ourselves, which is correct because it says we helped ourselves do some soup. Ourselves refers to we refers to ourselves, right? And then if we look at another example, right? It says, after the guests left, Amy made herself a cup of tea. So, as you can see, here we have Amy. They're not telling us I, you, she, he, or it. They're not telling us the pronoun. They're only giving us the noun, right? So, if we look at the word Amy made herself a cup of tea. If we look at where herself is here, and it needs to refer back to she, right? So which means that if we were to substitute the word Amy, we can then look at the pronoun. The pronoun of Amy would then be she. So we would say, after the guest left, she made herself a cup of tea. Who is she? Amy, right? The she refers to Amy or Amy refers to she, right? So sometimes they'll give you the noun, which is the name of someone, right? But then what you can just do is you can find the pronoun of that word, which can either be she or he, right? And then you will be able to see that it may be, for example, refers back to the subject or it refers to the reflexive pronoun. So once again, we have our singular subject as well as we have we have singular subjects as well as plural subjects, right? When we have a singular subject, then our reflexive pronoun, right, will end in self. And if we have a plural subject, and then our reflexive pronoun will end in selves, right? So, which means that if we use a reflexive pronoun, whether it is myself, yourself, herself, himself, or itself, it needs to refer back to our subject, right? And the subject is myself. The reflexive pronoun needs to refer back to I. Yourself needs to reflect back to you. Herself needs to refer back to she. Himself needs to refer back to he, and itself needs to refer back to it. And then with our plural subject, right? The reflexive pronoun, which is ourselves, needs to refer back to we, yourselves refer back to you, and themselves refer back to they. You're just gonna have to see in which context the subject of that sentence or of that pronoun is being used, or the pronoun is being used, right? You're going to also have to see how the reflexive pronoun is used within the sentence. Does it refer to one person or thing, or does it refer to more than one person or thing? So once again, if it refers to one person or thing, then it ends in self. And if it refers to more than one person or thing, it ends in selves. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and we are going to have to choose between personal and reflexive pronouns, and we're going to use reflexive pronouns, right? All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and we're going to the first lesson, which is to choose between personal and reflexive pronouns. All right, and once again, we see the reflexive pronoun, right? It is pronouns that end in self or selves, which we made mention of. And here we have our singular subjects on the side. And these singular subjects refers to our reflexive pronouns on the right, which is in bold, right? And when we have a singular subject, then our reflexive pronouns, they end in self, which can be I, myself, you, yourself, her, she, sorry, herself, him, himself, he, himself, or it itself. And when we have a plural subject, right? And then our reflexive pronoun ends in selves, and then it is we, ourselves, you, yourselves, or they, themselves, right? And then once again, we also said that a reflexive pronoun, it is used to refer back to the subject of a sentence or clause in which it appears, and it should agree with that subject, right? And then we also have a reflexive pronoun. Then we can also say that the reflexive pronoun, right, can only be used to refer to the subject of the sentence. Remember, the subject of the sentence is usually at the beginning of a sentence, right? The subject of the sentence tells us who or what is doing something within the sentence. So if we use a reflexive pronoun, then a reflexive pronoun can only be used to refer back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears, right? It refers back to the subject. It refers back to the person or thing that is doing something, right? But now, to refer to someone else, remember reflexive pronoun refers to the subject. But now, if you're referring to someone else or something else doing something, then it is a personal pronoun, right? A personal pronoun. And our personal pronouns are words like me, you, him, her, it, us, or them, right? Those are personal pronouns. And when it comes to personal pronouns, right, it refers to someone else or it refers to something else, right? And it should be used instead, right? So that personal pronouns should then be used instead because we are referring to someone else. You're not referring back to yourself. You're referring to someone else doing something, right? So instead of saying I, right, you can just say like me, right? For example, but we are going to look at that sentence now, or we're going to look at how we can use personal pronouns compared to reflexive pronouns. If we look at an example again, right? An example of a reflexive pronouns, right? It is these two. And reflexive pronouns, it says, we helped ourselves. Look at the words in bold that I'm also underlining. We helped ourselves to some soup, right? Which means that we went by ourselves, right? We went alone. So we got up and we went to go and get ourselves some soup, right? Nobody went to fetch soup for us. we went to get the soup ourselves, right? So as you can see, our reflexive pronoun is ourself and refers to we, right? Ourselves, we. So the subject of that sentence is we, so we use the reflexive pronoun, which is ourselves, right? If we look at another example, it says, after the guests left, Amy, which is the subject, made herself, which is the reflexive pronoun, a cup of tea, right? Which means that if we were to substitute the pronoun, right, of Amy, because remember a pronoun, it takes the place of a noun. So the noun is Amy, which means that the pronoun, right, will then refer to she. Amy is a girl, so it's she. So we can then say, instead of saying after the guest left, Amy made herself a cup of tea, we can then say after the guest left, she, right? So Amy can also be called she. So she made herself a cup of tea, right? Which means that herself refers back to she or refers back to Amy that is doing something. So Amy made herself a cup of tea. Nobody made it for her. She made it for herself. But now, if we look at the personal pronoun, right? Remember, we said a personal pronoun refers to someone else or something else, right? Instead of just yourself. It says, Jake wrote a note for himself. So Jake wrote a note for himself, right? So if we look at this sentence, Jake wrote a note for himself, right? Which means that Jake is a boy, which is he, wrote a note for himself, right? So himself is a reflexive pronoun, which means that this refers back to he. So this is a reflexive pronoun, right? Because himself refers back to the subject, which is either Jake, or we can then use Jake as he. And then we have the next subject, the next sentence or example, right? Which is Jake wrote a note for him, right? And if we look at this, Jake wrote a note for him, right? If we say him, that means that Jake could write a note to whoever, like somebody else. Can be Seth, can be Jake wrote a note to Nathan, Jake wrote a note to Prabha, Jake wrote a note to any other boy, right? To him. So which means that him is a personal pronoun, right? It's a personal pronoun. And it must refer to someone else other than Jake, right? So it refers to someone other than Jake that is, writing the note. Because Jake wrote a note to him. That means that Jake wrote a note to someone else, not to himself. All right, so now let's do our test. Let's go to our test, right? Where we're going to choose between a personal and a reflexive pronoun, right? So we are going to look at the two sentences and we're going to say, we're going to choose between the personal and reflexive pronoun. All right, it says select the best pronoun to complete the sentence, right? It says this weekend I am dedicating to taking care of chores that I've piled up. So do I say that this weekend I'm dedicating myself to taking care of the chores that I've piled up, or this weekend I'm dedicating me to taking care of chores that I've piled up? Which one is the correct sentence? Option one or option two? Do I say this weekend I am dedicating myself or I'm dedicating me? Option one or two? All right. So if we are going to choose the correct or the best pronoun to complete the sentence, and then we will choose option one, right? Which is this weekend I'm dedicating myself, which is the reflexive pronoun, to taking care of chores, which means that I'm going to do it myself, right? We need to select the best pronoun to complete the sentence. It says, I can't wait. I can't wait to acquaint myself with all that the city has to offer, or I can't wait to acquaint me with all that the city has to offer. Which one is correct? Is it option one, which is myself, that refers back to I, or me, which is referring back to I? So, which one is correct? Is it myself that refers to I, or me that refers to I? Option one or option two? All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, yes, we're going to choose option number one. So myself refers back to I. So that's a reflexive pronoun. So well done. Let's look at the next one. It says, in the subway station, a lost tourist asked me for directions to the flea market, or a lost tourist asked myself for directions to the flea market. Got it. Which one is correct? Option one, which is me, or option two, which is myself? Is it a reflexive pronoun, myself, or a personal pronoun, which is me? All right. And if we were to choose the correct option, we will say, in the subway station, a lost tourist asked me for directions to the flea market. Got it, right? Which means that that is a personal pronoun because it's referring to someone else. All right, the next one says, wrap around spiders hide during the day by wrapping, do we say by wrapping themselves around twigs, or by wrapping yourselves around twigs? Which one is the correct option? All right, then if we were to choose the correct option, we would say wraparound spiders that hide during the day by themselves around two twigs. And option one is correct. All right, so now we're going on to the next lesson, right, which is to use reflexive pronouns. So we're going to use reflexive pronouns, right? And remember, a reflexive pronoun, right? It either ends in self or it ends in selves. It ends in self if it has a singular subject or it refers to a singular subject, and it ends in selves if it has a plural subject. So now we are going to use reflexive pronouns, right? And remember when we said that when it comes to reflexive pronouns, a reflexive pronouns is used to refer back to the subject, whether it is singular or it is plural, right? Or to the clause in which it appears, and it needs to agree with the subject, right? It needs to appear with the subject, which is either I, you, she, he, or it, or we, you, or they. All right, so now let's look. We're gonna first look at an example, like an activity, and then we're going to our test. It says we need to complete the sentence with a pronoun that refers back to the subject in bold. And remember, the pronoun that refers back to the subject, we call that a reflexive pronoun, right? If it refers to someone else or something else, and then that is a personal pronoun, right? It says at the news conference, he. So he is the subject proclaimed. I'm good. Let me do this. I'm going to scroll down. And then you can see the subjects as well as the reflexive pronoun, and then you can choose the correct one, right? So we said he is a subject. So it says, at the news conference yesterday, he proclaimed. Do we say he proclaimed myself, yourself, herself, himself, or itself the greatest player in the history of basketball? Which one is correct? We need to choose between myself, yourself, herself, himself, or itself. That refers back to he. And if we were to select the correct reflexive pronoun, we will say he. So we say at the news conference yesterday, he, which is our subject, proclaimed himself the greatest player in the history of basketball. So yes, well done. Himself is correct. All right, let's look at the next one. It says Thomas Jefferson said that we, look at the word we is our subject. We elect to surround, do we say ourselves, themselves, or yourselves with becomes the museum of our souls and the archive of our experience. So we're gonna say, do we say Tom Jefferson said that that which we elect, that which we elect to surround, do we say ourselves, yourselves, or themselves with becomes the museum of our soul and the archive of our experiences. So we need to choose the correct one. And if we were to choose the correct one, right, that refers to the subject is we, which means that it refers to the reflexive pronoun is ourselves. So it says, that which we elect to surround ourselves with becomes the museum of our soul and the archive of our experiences. All right, let's do the last one and then we go on to our test. It says, did you know that an oyster feeds? Did you know that an oyster feeds? Do we say feeds myself, yourself, herself, himself, or itself by extracting algae from the water? Which one is correct? All right. So if we were to look at that sentence, right, then say it says, did you know that an oyster, right, an oyster feeds itself by extracting algae from the water? So itself, right? All right, so now we're going on to our test where we are going to use reflexive pronouns. And remember, with reflexive pronouns, we're referring to a singular subject, right? It ends with self, and a plural subject ends with selves. So we need to complete the sentence with a pronoun that refers back to the subject in bold. It says, when she goes to outdoor events in the winter, she generally wraps herself or himself in scarves and blankets. So, herself, option one, that refers to she, or himself, that refers to she. Option one or option two. All right, so if we were to complete the sentence with a pronoun that refers back to the subject in bold, our subject is she, right? So it says, when she goes to outdoor events in the winter, she generally, or it says she basically, she generally wraps herself in scarves and blanket, which is option one. The next one says, at the news conference yesterday, he, right? He is our subject. He proclaimed. Do we say he proclaimed himself, option one, or he proclaimed herself, option two, as the greatest player in the history of basketball? So we need to choose the correct pronoun, or let's say the reflexive pronoun that refers back to the subject, which is he. So is it option one, himself refers to he, or option two, herself refers back to he? Which one is correct? All right, so if we were to select the correct pronoun, right, or reflexive pronoun, then we will say at the news conference yesterday, he proclaimed himself the greatest player in the history of basketball. The next one says, as I waited in the car, I caught a glimpse. So right? So I is the subject. So I caught a glimpse of myself. Or do we say, I caught a glimpse of me in the rearview mirror and I realized that I had forgotten to brush my hair? So as I waited in the car, I caught a glimpse of myself, option one, or me, option two, in the rearview mirror and realized I had forgotten to brush my hair. All right, so if we refer to the reflexive pronoun, then we can say, as I waited in the car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror and realized that I had forgotten to brush my hair, which means that the reflexive pronoun myself refers back to the subject, which is I. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. In our next lesson, right, we are going to do is the pronoun reflexive or intensive. But for now, this is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much, grade 6, for joining the class. Um, we said reflexive pronouns are it ends in self if it refers to a singular subject, and it ends in self, and it refers to selves, or it ends in selves if it refers to a plural subject. Then we also have a personal pronoun, right? And a personal pronoun, it is then referring to something else. All right, so that is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much for joining the class, and I really hope that you're going to have a good day further. Till next time, goodbye.